Good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the call. Just a quick overview about Harman International. We're recently acquired by Samsung. Harman has a number of different brands under it. We specialize in electronics and sound and infotainment and navigation within the car, as well as professional solutions and consumer audio. Primarily, my responsibility currently at Harman is to oversee all of the IT aspects of our digital commerce practice, primarily specialize is in e-commerce for some of our consumer brands such as JBL, Harman Kardon, AKG, and Infinity Speakers.
Excellent. Thank you, Freddie. So we'll just jump into our fireside chat again. Our guest today, and we're very excited to have him with us, is Freddie Roseman, the Global IT Leader of Digital Commerce at Harman International. And again, my name is Eric Bushman. I'm the Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Paymetric. So we wanted to talk about the ROI, or return on investment, that Harman received from implementing some of Paymetric's solutions and services into their landscape. Let's start, though, Freddie, with a description of what the landscape for electronic payments and maybe even your e-commerce and web presence looked like prior to undertaking the project to implement some of Paymetric's solutions. Can you give us a sense for what that looked like, maybe the breadth of it across different geographies and brands, and what you began with and what you were looking to improve upon?
Sure, absolutely. So when I joined Harman about 4 years ago, we had a pretty young business in e-commerce. So we were seeking to grow primarily our B2C e-commerce business. We were just started implementing a platform from Oracle ATG in the US. And we were doing about, I think, somewhere around $4 million a year annually in e-commerce sales. And it really encompassed just the US. And one of the main goals given by Dinesh Paliwal, our CEO, was to grow our direct e-commerce business to eventually hit, somewhere near 10% of our overall sales. So I was brought in particularly to help assist with that strategy from an IT perspective and figure out how could we do this. Coming from a payments background myself, I knew that in order to properly grow from an IT side, we needed to ensure that we would not only think about the e-commerce environment, but specifically the payments environment. So when we think of e-commerce globally, we're not only thinking about Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, but a number of different payment options and ways to pay and times to pay. So that was key. Along with that was also changing our overall e-commerce platform to support that. So we took on that strategy over the next 4 years to expand from one country, which was the US, and to currently we're in about 15 or 16 countries, which span North America, Europe, as well as Australia, APAC. So we started with one site, and now we're at 50 e-commerce sites with a backlog of another 50 non-e-commerce sites. So total 100 sites, which ultimately is our goal, is to make them all e-commerce revenue generating sites. So that's where we started off 4 years ago, and kind of the vision is ultimately to continue to grow that.
So in those 5 years, I would assume that there's been, at least from your vantage point, there's been quite a change in the technologies that are utilized in not only standing up those e-commerce sites, but in the payments industry as well. You did mention that you look not only at the traditional credit card types, but along with the change in technology for your e-commerce platforms, what have you seen as far as a change in the types of payments that your customers are demanding that you accept and that you're rolling out over time?
So definitely the one key change that we're seeing, it's increasing and accelerating, is the mindset from consumers that whatever device they're using to buy and whatever instrument they're using to pay, they're expecting your support, and they're expecting it to be seamless. So buy anywhere, pay anywhere, deliver fast. That's basically, what our customers are looking for from an e-commerce environment. And so, naturally, kind of when you get towards that checkout, you really want to make sure that you're providing that, or else your customer will just jump to your competitor who is providing that. And so that's always been our strategy. Originally, we were using multiple different payment providers across our SAP systems. And what we found out was that it really didn't help us, just kind of leverage the ecosystem that we built. So we have a single SAP instance for our consumer division, which serves us globally, but we were fragmented on the payment end. So we really couldn't kind of leverage the reporting and the analytics, and quickly move at the pace that we wanted to move to accept different types of payments. And so that's why we moved to Paymetric, on the SAP side, which was to standardize how we accept the payment, how we process it, and make sure it was very flexible, that we could also accept alternative forms of payments and be able to plug them in at a fairly quick clip. So, for instance, in the Netherlands and in Germany, if we wanted to quickly accept Klarna, for us, it was as simple as calling up Paymetric, let them know where we need to certify a new payment type, and within 2 weeks have that turned on, assuming our acquirer supported it, and then have it turned on and be able to accept it. And so that was really key, is being able to move really quickly, and accepting those types of alternative forms of payments, so that our customers are happy and satisfied when they get to checkout.
You've mentioned a couple times now that consolidation of multiple payment vendors or of your e-commerce platform was an essential part of your project and an ongoing part of your project. Were there other goals that you had in mind as part of this process of expanding your e-commerce presence? And what pain points or challenges had you identified specifically that you were looking to address with part of this project?
Yeah, so definitely along with growth, as you grow, and it's becoming definitely more and more prevalent now, as we hear in the news, we have to be constantly vigilant from a security perspective. So once we open it up to a new region, that just then means that now you have a whole nother region of folks who, want to fraudulently buy things from you or want to break into your systems. And so, the impact of a breach is massive, especially to, companies that, are need to gain the trust of consumers. So that was also a huge requirement on our end, was ensuring that our credit cards are protected, our systems are protected, and that the vendors that we're working with, that we're trusting our credit cards with, are fully PCI compliant, and even go beyond that to ensure that data is protected, right? And that's also one of the reasons why we consolidated from multiple providers and brands who, it's kind of difficult to track all of that, to a single set of trusted providers, Paymetric being one of the key ones. So that PCI compliance, tokenizing our credit card, ensuring that our systems on the front end, we're not actually touching the credit card data, ensuring that our SAP systems, we're just getting tokenized data, and so not putting our SAP systems in the full reach scope of PCI from that perspective was huge. We also use our SAP systems for manufacturing, right? Because we're also a manufacturer. So, ensuring that SAP and our commerce systems were properly protected from a security standpoint was a huge point, in addition to the flexibility and the growth.
PCI tends to be one of those things that every company is concerned about, and it's certainly one of the top priorities that companies have when they're implementing an e-commerce solution. A company like Harman, which sells consumer electronics, tends to be a type of company that, in our experience at Paymetric, we see targeted by cyber criminals. It's one of those coveted goods, and we tend to see companies in the consumer electronics space targeted for fraudulent activity. is your, I guess, are your sales predominantly business to consumer sales? Do you also have some that are business to business? And have you had to react to potential fraud differently based on the type of transaction, whether you're selling to a consumer or to a partner?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, Harman, we definitely have multiple types of clients. A significant portion of our business is B2B. So we sell through, brands such as Best Buy and folks like that. We do huge orders. In some countries, we actually sell through distributors, right? And so, those in a B2B scenario, your partner is a little more known, a little more trusted, and so there are certain steps you can take to add additional security around that, without affecting your conversion rate, right? I think a B2C scenario, which we have here as well, provides those additional challenges where you have this balancing act of protecting consumer data, which you must do, right? But making sure you don't, you're not incorrectly rejecting a good consumer, right? Someone who truly wants to buy your product, a good consumer, a good payer, but your fraud rules are too tight, and so you're rejecting them. So definitely there are different strategies around that. But definitely having the tokenized data, and having part of that protected is one of the tools that allows us to, then kind of worry about the next step, which is, okay, we've protected data. We're making sure that if someone were to somehow breach the system, all they're getting is tokens. The next step is now trying to make sure that our consumers can actually make it through our site, and we're filtering out the fraudulent folks. Right, so it definitely helps give us a little bit of peace of mind to focus on the other half of battling fraud.
And when you're implementing these types of solutions to address those potential fraudulent situations, have you seen that it's had an impact at all to the amount of time it takes for a consumer to interact on your e-commerce site and place an order? Has it caused more consumers to complain that it takes too long, it's too difficult, it's made the process more tedious than before? Or have you seen your customers basically be able to continue without much interference in the order taking process?
It's the latter. It's the latter. So we've definitely, one of the approaches that we've taken is to integrate such that we keep our consumers on our site, right, and not have them context switch and things like that. So in doing that, then we can kind of employ a little bit more on the site to help us make sure that a user who is a good user, we can determine that, right? We can employ certain things like Google address checks and certain. We have a couple of different fraud checks, and we have different fraud checks in EMEA versus the US, such as like we'll use 3D Secure in EMEA. We'll also use it in Australia because it's a little bit more accepted there, right? In the US, we don't use 3D Secure, but then we're doing a little bit more analytics on the transaction that comes through, right? With our fraud rule checks. And we're always trying to we're definitely balancing, making sure that we don't improperly reject certain users. For sure, we will have users who with false positives. But then in that case, we've set up our customer service system where they can always call up our customer service. We'll do some additional validations there to get the order through, right? So you definitely have to take a couple steps there. But for the most part, we're always trying to target keeping the friction low.
Right. Well, and just like you mentioned with the types of payments that you can accept in different areas of the globe, it sounds like you're also tailoring your approach to stemming the tide of fraudulent activity based on the geography that the consumer may be in or that the website is presenting in, differently in EMEA or Australia than here in the US. So that flexibility in being able to approach the problem with a variety of different solutions that are tailored for the geography. Sounds like it's an important part of your solution and one of the items that you were looking for in a solution as well. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. There is no kind of one size fits all within a global e-commerce operation. We've definitely found that every region has its similarities, but where there are differences, you really have to plan for them. And that's in just general sales approaches as well as fighting cyber criminals and fraud. There definitely are differences to be aware of. But the good thing is that it's to be aware of them and have partners, which we've chosen, that provide that flexibility at the regional level, right? So that we can apply these different strategies and it not affect our revenue and profit goals.
Absolutely, and that's something that Paymetric has had to do over the years as well. It's when you start working with multinational corporations such as Harman and some of the other large corporations that Paymetric works with, it becomes very obvious very quickly that there is no one-stop solution if you're going to be processing multiple currencies and multiple geographies 24/7 around the globe. So in a similar way, Paymetric has partnered with payments providers around the world to service different geographies and different methods of payment, the different payment types. You mentioned Klarna, some of the other solutions such as PayPal, Bill Me Later, Ideal, some of the bank transfer types that you would see in Europe or in Asia that you don't necessarily see here in North America. In order to provide the interface and capability for our customers to reach all of those target markets, we've had to go out and partner with various companies as well. So that's hopefully that gateway from Paymetric to all these payment partners is something that will continue to expand as the needs of our merchants expand to deal with the demands from their customers for different forms of payment. So along those same lines, as we're talking about expanding or selling in these different geographies, you mentioned earlier that as you've seen the landscape change over the past several years and you've had to upgrade your technology and adapt your websites to new technology and approaches, you've probably also seen a large change, as most companies have, in the way consumers access your site. In the past, it may have just been through a workstation or a laptop, and you would gear your e-commerce platform to those types of screens and devices. But now with the advent of mobile technology and people accessing your sites on tablets or smartphones, soon to be on digital watches, those kinds of approaches, how have you had to adapt not only your presentation of your e-commerce sites, but the security related to those different forms of access?
Yeah, definitely very good question, Eric. So, it's absolutely amazing, just within 4 years, how quickly, the way folks access our site has changed, and expectations around speed and readability and usability. When I first came here, we were doing a project around redesigning our site to make it look great for desktop, because that was the overwhelming majority of our users. At that point in time, maybe 40 to 50% of our users were also using like Internet Explorer, right? Now you look at 4 years later, we're redesigning. We're in the middle of a redesign for our mobile because we've got maybe I think it's somewhere around 10% of our users using Internet Explorer, most overwhelming majority using Chrome, and then we've got somewhere normal 51 to 52% of our user base accessing our site just on a mobile phone, right? So now it's actually the majority using mobile technologies to access our website. So we had to change our mindset to ensure that our payment screens look fine on a mobile device. Our whole website is blazing fast. We have to make sure it's fast. We have to make sure it gets the information across. Um, it's a known fact that their conversions tend to fall on mobile, right? But there's still high engagement. So so now the challenge is making sure that we can kind of take those folks that are looking at our site on a mobile device and ensure that they can get all the way through and actually buy products right on mobile. Now that that's where they're coming from. So we now have to kind of look at things from a mobile perspective first, looking at mobile first, and the same thing also goes with security. How does that change? And a part of it is we can't, we're not able to answer all those questions on our own, which is why we rely on partners that have this line of sight across the industry, like Paymetric, to help us as we kind of go through this journey. That's a huge benefit of working with folks like Paymetric who have this breadth and depth of what's going on with also my peers, right, across the industry, and what are you seeing? Because we're focused on certain things on our end at Harman, but we definitely rely on our partners who specialize in payment and specialize in e-commerce platforms and things like that to help us assist with us making these decisions, because things are moving really, really quickly.
I was going through some boxes of old electronic gear that I have that I was trying to clean out, and I have kids in high school, and was showing them some of the different devices. I pulled out an old Palm Pilot and tried to explain what that was used for. And next to that, I had a MP3 player that was about the same size, and then off to the side, I had an old mobile phone. And of course, my kids laughed, and we had fun explaining how that's all now merged into smartphones. From an e-commerce perspective, when you're a merchant trying to sell your products, as you've just said, now you've had to adapt your web presence not only to service people traditionally going on with a workstation or a laptop and an internet browser, whatever type it may be, but now we're having to react to the smaller screens of tablets and smartphones. And when you look at people who are forward thinking as to what may be next, some of the discussions I've heard are maybe we're going to have to react to people making purchases in virtual reality environments or with virtual reality devices. And as more and more companies introduce smartwatches or digital watches that have an even smaller footprint and a smaller screen, there's of necessity going to need to be a continuous adaptation of a merchant's presence to adapt to all of this. So we're seeing our merchant customers certainly have to address that on their e-commerce platforms. And as you've mentioned, e-commerce platforms evolve much more rapidly than the ERP backend systems tend to. So let's shift a little bit away from just the pure e-commerce discussion and talk about what's going on with your ERP backend. Like most of our customers, they're either using an SAP or an Oracle ERP system on the backend. Traditionally, those types of systems and applications haven't been evolving as rapidly as an e-commerce presence does. And that's fine, because for the most part, those back-end systems handle very time-tested and true business processes, such as facilitating the delivery of goods and the financial postings, et cetera. Have you seen much change in the interaction between your e-commerce and your ERP system on the back end as part of this evolution of your systems, or do you anticipate much change in the future?
Well, certainly there has definitely been lots of change. We use SAP as our back end. That's our ERP, order management, for financial management as well. And so I didn't come from an ERP background, but I had to definitely gear up pretty quickly and learn ERP and SAP as I got here, because I frankly wanted I wanted things to move much faster than they were moving. And as you said, Eric, that it's just not the nature. But
Right.
with definitely within these 4 years, you know, we you know, my team moves in an agile mode, and we've kind of, you know, shifted some mentality such that we've kind of set up a small, you know, kind of group of folks within our organization, even on the ERP side, to help us with all of our initiatives that we're doing, because our initiatives tend to definitely be back end focused as well. You know, for instance, you know, real time messaging as to where your package is coming from, right? We implemented that, and that required lots of ERP integration. Right now, we just completed an update for financial reconciliation of all our payments across all of our different providers, from PayPal to Adyen, right? Adyen handles most of our payment types, and then we have PayPal. So we suck in the settlement files and reconcile that against like our orders and cash that's in the bank. And actually, it was Paymetric that just completed that work for us. Our financial, you know, our financial execs were very, very happy at the completion of that, just in time for our holiday season. So that was a large project that we did that's going to make things a lot more efficient on our back end. And we've got a couple more in the pipeline. So I think the requests, at least for us, as we're growing on the ERP side, it definitely is. It the request for new functionality and enhancements definitely affects ERP, and it's not slowing down from my end. So, you know, we kind of had to put together this tiger team to really help us out with that, but still ensure that we're not breaking SAP, which is key to our business.
And I think that's something that most of our customers either are surprised by or come to accept as part of their implementation. The e-commerce front end is the flashy, attractive, appealing, modern part of the sales process in you know, this century. The back-end ERP system is the workhorse. It's the one that handles all of the management of your stock and the financial processes. And when you make a payment on a e-commerce platform, eventually it's going to have to flow through that back-end ERP system, which is going to handle half of the payment process. You accept the payment up front on your e-commerce system, but the ERP is still responsible for tracking and in most cases, finalizing or submitting the settlement or capture request. So it does span both systems, and as you mentioned with your Tiger team, it's going to span multiple departments within your organization. Have you found that because there is that split, that you've had to maybe shuffle some organizations around or ensure a tighter sense of communication between teams so that you can have both of those parts of the process working in harmony?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because, you know, I think, you know, with e-commerce, because you know, there's just so many players involved in the full e-commerce value chain. You know, there are very few people that understand it all. And as you get more and more into the back end, as you mentioned, Eric, it gets kind of, you know, a little bit more and more difficult to understand. But the importance is so critical. And so we've definitely had, you know, whether it's recording sessions, trainings, where we've brought in the right folks to help do this knowledge sharing of the importance of these initiatives. And you know, where things start, where things end, whether it's putting together some PowerPoint slides or some flow charts, or, you know, having folks just kind of explain things. It's really key, and it's been key, and it's been important for us, because generally no one gets it all. But when you kind of explain things in terms of, if we're not going to do this part, then, you know, really here's where it breaks, and here's kind of the financial impact, that tends to help. So we've taken a variety of approaches. That one definitely helps. And I don't see that slowing down as we continue to expand.
Sure. Have you seen any other impacts to your financial process when you introduce new payment types? Obviously, that has to be something that's not only vetted but then introduced across teams as you prepare for rollouts of e-commerce platforms in new markets, new geographies. There's got to be some coordination there. What other impacts have you seen to your financial process as part of this ongoing project?
Well, every time we introduce a new payment type, then from a finance perspective, our accountants definitely want to understand, how are we receiving the cash, how are we accepting the payments, how are we coordinating the settlements, things like that, right? For instance, we're introducing Apple Pay, and we need to understand, how these payments are coming through, right? How do we identify them? It's we'd like to think it's as easy as just turning it on and maybe set it and forget it. The reality is that's not the case. However, introducing something like Apple Pay, we think will be a huge benefit from a mobile perspective, right? Because of the simplicity of how easy it is to pay on the front end. We'll also be introducing at some point in time Samsung Pay as well, right? Along the same paradigm of we want to ensure that if you're comfortable paying in a certain method, we're providing it, so you're not moving off our site and going somewhere else. And over these last 4 years that I've been here, we've had more than double-digit growth every single year in e-commerce, and I think it's in no small part to having going along that track of making sure that you get to that final step, you can actually pay whichever way you want in a very simple and easy manner.
Yeah, I think as you see e-commerce solutions consolidate into maybe a single channel, a single platform, we're starting to see the methods of payment expand, which is kind of an ironic inverse approach there, inverse proportion. Certainly, it's going to keep us all busy in reacting to what's next for payments. And with that, let's pull out your crystal ball, Freddie, and why don't you tell us what's next or what's in the future for Harman as far as e-commerce or payments? What do you envision you're going to have to attack and approach and implement in the future?
Well, for us, I think, definitely, we're continuing to expand. But as we get into, I think some of the, the developing markets that are high growth, I think we're going to see some kind of brand new forms of payment that we're really going to have to plan for. So folks are paying for things with Bitcoin, for instance, right? They're and it's actually, they're paying for things with Bitcoin in stores already, like in China. So it's quite interesting that as we kind of go further out into these high growth nations, that the payment types just pop up, and the adoption happens very quickly, so you have to react very quickly. I think we're definitely going to have to plan for that and be ready for that, especially with the the younger generation of folks. I think we're going to have to also look into other forms of like P2P payments. Venmo has really has a really high following. So these digital wallets are starting to pop up. It used to be that we were just coding for PayPal, right? Because that's who everyone used. But now there's so many more, and their adoption rate is growing. Klarna is making a push in the U.S., right? Bill Me Later, which has been out for quite some time, has taken off in some areas and not in others. But I think we're going to see a lot more of those types of payment types, where it's like some level of financing involved, right? I think those are really going to start to pop up, and as they take root in some of the developing nations, I think they'll also kind of make their way over here into the U.S. as well. We've been talking about like chip and pin for quite some time in the U.S. We have the chips in retail, right? Not quite the pins yet. Eventually, I think the pins will make its way into the U.S. in order to fight the high fraud that we have, right? But once the pins come, then that'll change some fraud providers that make a pretty huge living on the fact that there's not that secured pin. But chip and pin, even in e-commerce, is just it's common in EMEA. So I see those types of things just starting to over the next couple of years, keeping us very busy from a payments perspective, and hopefully it'll provide just opportunities for revenue growth across the board.
Agreed. It's an ever-evolving world. I lived in Europe a decade ago, and I still have coins and some bills from different countries who have had their currencies replaced by the euro. And every now and then I'll pull them out and show my kids the Deutschmarks or the Belgian francs or the Dutch guilders, and those are payment types that have effectively gone extinct. They've been replaced by the euro. And over time in the payments industry, as you mentioned, we're seeing the introduction of new methods of payment. Blockchain, such as Bitcoin, is certainly something that's up and coming, and I would suspect that we're going to see more and more of it across different types of electronic currencies. And it's an ever-evolving world that we all need to react to and keep in front of, because we're going to see that slow march towards new and different forms of payment. And fortunately, e-commerce platforms can react to the business workflow changes or the payment workflow changes much more fast or much more quickly than a back-end ERP system. So our focus tends to be on the front end as we're adapting to these forms of payment. But I agree, we're certainly going to continue to see more and more changes as time marches on. Well, Freddie, thank you. I think we're going to take some questions now, and we'll probably wrap this up in just a few more minutes after some questions. Excellent information that we received from you. One of the questions that we do have, and for those who are listening, please feel free to submit your questions. Continue to submit your questions for us if you would like, and we'll address those now. But one of the questions we'd like to ask is, as part of this ongoing process, you've certainly had to look at many different areas of your presence as a merchant. You've had to look at e-commerce systems, and you've had to look at how this is going to affect your back-end ERP systems, how it impacts your day-to-day activities for employees, whether they're in finance or they're in order management, or they're actually taking orders over the phone. They're dealing with managing and maintaining an e-commerce site. When you look at the entire breadth of how this impacts your organization, what kind of best practices or lessons learned would you like to share with our listeners so that they can learn from your experience?
Sure. So I found that the setup that we have is actually is very useful. And so our setup, our sort of structure is we have a global team who's kind of which I'm a part of, who's in charge of setting overall direction, strategy, and kind of ensuring that as we improve and as we grow, we're not leaving anything behind. And so we all have a role to play there. And then we have our regional teams, which are focused on sales growth within each region, and they lean upon us for support to bring that global expertise and try to keep them from making mistakes and aid them in growth. I think that structure is very helpful if you are a global organization and your e-commerce system is global. It also helps us kind of standardize things to enable. So to me, I think number one, having a setup like that really helps if you're really kind of seeking for that fast path. The other piece I think that's also very important, and it's small but very important, is I always, as we're doing here, I always make sure that we train. So anything new that comes out, I put together, or I say we put together a training plan to ensure that each region gets it. So when we roll out new payment types. We've got a communication plan that goes out, but then we also actively hold training to make sure that everyone, from the merchandiser to the accountant, is aware and understands their role and how things are going to change. And then we tape it. We record it, right? So if they've missed it, then they know where to get to it, so that everyone is enabled one way or the other and is not really waiting. I think it's key to not be the bottleneck in a global environment like this. So I'd say like those are kind of the two most important pieces from my perspective.
Excellent. Here's another question that kind of ties into that, and the user asks, or the listener asks, what are your approaches or concerns regarding storage of some of your international customers' data in your backend systems? And I guess the assumption here is your SAP backend located in North America, for example, and it's storing data from customers in Europe or Asia, and how do the different data privacy laws around the globe impact how you approach compliance with those laws?
Good question. Very good question. So I think another key another key tool to have in your toolbox is, especially when you're doing these global implementations, and we have it, is you have to have like a legal expert pretty much on call. As we rolled out to EMEA, as we rolled out to Asia, one of our checklists was, what do we have to do from a data privacy perspective? Are we implementing safe harbor properly? Things like that. And so for sure, I actually, it's very contextual here. I actually have a call with one of our, legal team in 2 or 3 days to just understand how things are changing, because you may have been great a year ago, but then the laws in EMEA are changing, and so you now have to look at your data storage policy to make sure that you're not incorrectly storing things in the wrong region. So for sure we have regular meetings with legal to ensure that we're complying, and if necessary, segregate out our data in SAP, as well as in our commerce platforms, right? And sometimes it involves us having to put together a plan to shift data over, depending if laws have changed. Other times it involves us having to mask certain data, or really kind of explain why are we storing certain pieces of data, right? And you really have to be vigilant. So that's what we've done on our end, is just making sure that one of our best buddies on hand are the legal experts for each region.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that the data privacy laws are going to evolve just as quickly as we see with the methods of payment and the payments landscape. Secure Harbor has gone away and it's been replaced with Privacy Shield, and there's different states in the United States who have their own data privacy laws. There's not really a national consensus, and then you throw PCI into the mix, which is driven by a foundation set up by the payments networks themselves. There's going to be an ever-changing and evolving world of data privacy, and certainly having your ducks in a row and having an organization or a group within your organization to help address that as it changes is going to be essential. And as you mentioned, certainly you need to have someone from a legal standpoint involved, because it may not always be a legal requirement, such as in the case of PCI, that's more industry driven, but we are seeing more and more legislation, certainly as the world becomes more aware of the ever increasing number of data breaches that never seem to stop being discussed in the news. So agreed, that's definitely an important area of your overall landscape to keep in mind. Looks like we have just one last question, and this is going to be directed to you as well, around the vendor selection process. When you were looking at different vendors, and I guess it's not only related to payment processing, but as you're looking at e-commerce vendors and you're looking at ERP vendors, and then you're deciding which payment processing vendors have the best services and solutions for you, and you're looking at how they all interact, what were some of the key points or the key functions, services, et cetera, that helped you decide on the vendors that comprise your landscape today?
Great question. So I have an architectural background. So I've always, for me, one of the key equalizers, I'd say, when you have a heterogeneous environment like we do, is interoperability. So, we put out an RFP to choose our payment and e-commerce providers, because we swapped them both within 4 years. And one of the key things I always look for is interoperability. Can my payment providers play nice with each other? Can my e-commerce system easily talk to SAP? We use Salesforce Commerce Cloud right now for our e-commerce provider. They used to be known as Demandware, right? Does the provider provide a cartridge? Things like that. And I will actually go out of my way, if a solution involves 2 or 3 partners, to make sure we get all these partners in a room and have them agree. And Eric, I'm sure if you talk to your colleagues, they will tell you, have them agree that you can play nice and work with each other, right? Does this file format work for you? Does this, so that, to me, that's absolutely key, because requirements are going to change. We were just talking about privacy laws. Machine learning is huge now. We have to think about kind of what's going on there. And so we need partners who are going to talk to each other, both from a technical perspective. So I mean system to system, as well as, from a business perspective, executive to executive, all the way down to the developers, the programmers, and the sales folks. And so that's what I look for primarily when I choose partners, especially in the e-commerce environment where, again, you look through the value chain, it's massive, from ratings and review companies to order management to the e-commerce platform. So you're going to be dealing with generally no less than 10 or 11 vendors, and that's a small number. So getting them to play nice with each other is always what I look for.
I would agree. It tends to be that you can no longer focus on just one little niche. Paymetric got its start 20 years ago as primarily a company that helped integrate payments for SAP users. And as we've seen in the last 20 years, an expansion of ERP systems, of e-commerce platforms, of payment solution providers, the acquirers, the networks, the different forms of payment, et cetera, we've had to broaden our scope and focus as well. But it does come down to that interoperability and your ability to be flexible and to change and evolve as the landscape changes and evolves, and it's going to continue to do that. So we're not resting on our laurels at Paymetric. We certainly have a good foundation as an integration partner for large ERP systems into the payments world, but that's going to change, and it's going to grow and evolve just as you've seen your landscape grow and evolve. So I'm sure there's plenty of challenges ahead for both of us, plenty of opportunity, and certainly lots of growth ahead. So anyway, with that said, Freddie, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and Harmon's story with us today. We appreciate you being here.